and now yield to my friend from Texas, Mr. ChipRoy, for 5 minutes.
I thank my friend from Texas, the chairman. I appreciate the time. I appreciate the director coming here to address the committee, and I appreciate, and I have to state on the record, the willingness always for the CBO director and his staff to be available anytime we ask. And I've never had a problem with that, and I'm greatly appreciative of that responsiveness whenever we're reaching out to your office. Along those lines, I mean, and I think I actually want to know your views on this. This is something that is, I want to highlight that in 2018, CBO published a document called the Budget and Economic Outlook 2018 to 2028 that I'm sure the director and staff are familiar with. And in that document, there was a table that compared CBO's economic growth projections from TICJA, from the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, to projections made by other organizations, right? From Goldman Sachs, IMF, Moody's, Tax Foundation, other things. Yeah. And so, and that table, you can't see it, but it's you guys can look up, the table's in there. And it's interesting, right? Because it's got CBO that sort of pegs the GDP impacts, right? 2018, 2022. There's 2 organizations that were higher, and there was 5, 6 that were lower, right? So it's not a statement about CBO or anything about the numbers. I'm just saying it had some comparative data that was helpful, because you look out and you go see, okay, well, that's what these other organizations think. But question, I am unaware of and have not seen any such table, for example, and this is not a pointed question. It's actually trying to flush out in terms of oversight options that we could have. I've not seen a similar table on the so-titled Inflation Reduction Act. Has anything been produced by the CBO that has a table that shows, okay, here's the impact of the so-titled Inflation Reduction Act versus other entities?
No, you haven't done exactly that. In the June budget update, we had a discussion of how the numbers have changed, but we didn't compare. In some sense, we didn't compare them directly to others, but implicitly, others. At the time that JCT estimates came out, others said no, it's going to be many more dollars. So we didn't do that comparison directly, but we said, oh, it's going to be many more dollars.
Well, I think this is what I'm trying to get at in terms of timing, and I don't have the exact timetable right in front of me of every time an entity came out and did one. Yeah. But I do think it's important, right? So when the IRA's subsidies and funding were estimated to cost $391 billion at the outset by CBO, I think. Is that correct?
Yeah, something like that. That's right.
And so, and then that what allowed proponents of the legislation to claim that it cut the deficit, right? That was a statement about how the Inflation Reduction Act was sold.
That's right. Now, of course, as you know, the scorekeeping guidelines meant, that those revenues were not in the, in the cost estimate. I mean, they were on the page, but they didn't count in the official score. But of course, we knew that people, talked about those together.
But now we would say that would score higher, that it would expect to increase the deficit, right?
It's in the baseline, and taking the resources away from the service, by the scorekeeping rules or the guidelines we follow would be in a score.
To the tune of $700 to $800 billion.
It depends on the particulars of the legislation, how much the resources are taken away. But there would be a revenue loss. Taking away resources from the IRS would reduce revenue in our cost estimates and in the baseline.
So it would increase the deficit, though, by a significant pop, more than what was originally estimated when it was put forward back in 2022. Because at that point, we were talking about $391 billion, and now we're talking about a higher number. I mean, and I asked that just because in March of 23, just a few months after the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, right, Goldman Sachs came out with a fairly now well-known estimate that the bill's energy subsidies would cost $1.2 trillion. And that was mere months after the initial estimates. So I guess my question is can CBO put some tables together, and would it be helpful with respect to the Inflation Reduction Act about outside entities like Goldman Sachs, and I think there have been others that demonstrate the impact fiscally being quite a bit greater than the original $391 billion estimate?
We can do it. I would hesitate to, because it would be like me throwing JCT under the bus. So, I'm not sure I want to make that table so explicit, but all the information is in our budget update, and we've written, I think we've written it clearly, just not quite in the way
Well,
you said.
what I'm saying with my time expiring is I do think it's important to be that explicit. And it's not about throwing JCT under the bus. It's about Congressional Budget Office helping us budget. It's making that stuff very affirmatively available so we know the numbers. But I yield back with my time.
Mr. Roy, thank you for your comments.